So welcome again. In this case, we have the honor of having Guy Spier on the show. You know, I'm totally glad because it's a thing that I wanted to do from a long time ago. And I was after him, and eventually he told me, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, yeah, excellent. He has granted me the interview, so I'm super glad. So if the name Guy Spier seems familiar, it may be because of his growing reputation among the value investing community. Spiers is famous for paying $650K along with Monish Pabrai to have lunch with Warren Buffett. His 2014 book, The Education of a Value Investor, has also made the rounds and is becoming a very popular book. It's currently rated at a 4.5 star, read by 693 people on Amazon. Spier was born in South Africa and educated at the City of London's Freeman School, later receiving his MBA from Harvard. He started out as a professional money manager in 1997 with $15 million, mostly from family and friends. Since then, he's managed to pile up outstanding returns versus the S&P 500. Guy Spier's investment vehicle is his Aquamarine Capital, and an investment partnership inspired by Warren Buffett's early partnership. Aquamarine is fairly restrictive with regards to who it manages money for, and fund information is only distributed by request. So this was the introduction, and now I want to throw the first question. This is a weird question, but I kind of like this thing, so I'm gonna throw it to you, guys. So the point is, there are many fantastic books within the collection called Srimad Bhagavatam, in which the author says, you have to be more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. If I were to ask you about your investment career, I would not address the celebrity or the writer or the guy who had lunch with Warren Buffett, but the common man behind it all. So what makes Guy Spier yourself?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that extraordinary introduction. I'd quite like to meet that guy. He sounds pretty good, you know. And,
I'm doing it now. I'm
it's always interesting to hear your own CV read by somebody else and to see what that sounds like. So you know, one of this. So that I just want to read it out because you also sent me some of these questions because it's something really to pause on. You have to be more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree, and that's a beautiful statement that obviously, Ivan, kind of it struck you, and it also struck me when I read it, and I don't think that you or I or most of the people listening are as humble as a blade of grass or as tolerant as a tree. But I would say that when it comes to the investing world, because what the writer is expressing there is something very Buddhist. But when it comes to the investing world, there's also another element to it, which is the capacity to act. And when you listen to Charlie Munger, it's the capacity to act in size when an opportunity shows up, and to have husbanded the cash resources to have them available to act in size. When it comes to humble as a blade of grass, I actually think that all people who've been in the financial markets and survived for more than 5 years or a decade are taught that humility, because there is no mind and no person that I think can win for even a period of 5 years every year. And so the people who aren't capable of being humble don't stick around. They leave, or they get put out of business in one way or another. So the humility, I don't think, is an issue. I think that what really interests me, and then, you know, tolerance is a tree. Well, I guess and maybe there's a mistranslation there, because in the blade of grass kind of shifts with the wind, but the tree stands firm. If we think of a kind of a hard oak tree, and it just stands there no matter what. And maybe that's the other sort of like the egotistical side that says, I'm humble. I know I don't know everything, but I'm going to make this move. And I will do this with a huge amount of money, the way perhaps we saw Charlie Munger just did with Alibaba, where he kind of doubled down in a major way on his Alibaba position. So the humility, I don't think is hard. Although I think that there's also a huge part of it, which is just nurture. So, I'm spending a lot of time wondering for how long this very egotistical, narcissistic man, Boris Johnson, will continue to be the Prime Minister of England. And that is that is innate in him. That is something that clearly he's had his whole life. And if I compare myself to other personalities in the investment world, I think that I'm just innately, I have more capacity to be humble. But I also believe that it's a kind of a ruse for me as well. It's a safe place to go to. So if you act humble, then you're not going to fall down as much, or people are not going to show you up as much, something like that. When it comes to having the kind of the egotism, we see, so I think an interesting example right now in the markets is this Kathy from ARK Investment. I mean, she's a woman and she's relatively softly spoken, but she's actually highly egotistical. She believes she's right in pretty much everything. And to maintain that egotism in the face of setbacks like she's about to do, and then stick around, I think that that's a capacity that my friend Monish Pabrai has. He takes big positions and he makes bold moves, and some of the moves work out spectacularly for him, but some don't. But then when they don't, it doesn't impact his ego, and he's got this way of being super honest with himself and the world about the mistakes that he may have made and he's very clear with his investors that 1 out of 3 decisions is quite likely to be a mistake. So but in a certain way, I'll just leave you with this, and it's kind of a non-answer to your question, but the best questions don't have answers, because the question is the answer in a certain way, because you clearly took a lot of time to think about the question. And, I am so sorry to disappoint you, Ivan, because, I can totally understand how you'd like to say, well, I'm going to get Guy on this call. I'm going to ask him this question that's going to be bugging me. And who knows, maybe, just maybe he'll give me the insight. And all I come back to you with is, yeah, great question.
But it's perfect. It's perfect, because it's actually what is happening to me. I don't have the answer. So yeah, I was kind of looking for it.
Yeah, but there are some things like there are some whole lives that are led with one big question, where the person is trying to answer that question, and that question is what drives the person's life. And this quote that you've given is something that one could put up on the wall and keep for the rest of your life. Actually, you have to be and I kind of feel like I want to. More humble than a blade of grass and more sturdy than a tree, maybe something like that. And, and it sort of raises the question, is this a time where I have to move with the wind, or is this a time when I have to stand against the wind and keep growing up? And which is it? And it's not always obvious. And I actually think that if we keep asking ourselves that question, then we'll actually get better at both. Because so, like I said, to ask the question is to answer it. It's a great question. It's a fantastic quote. It's actually, I don't know, I'm not an expert in poetry, but I think that all of us, if we want to live a complete life, should expose ourselves to poetry. And this is beautifully poetic idea that is expressed in just one line that is a gift to anybody who hears it. And so thanks to the guy who wrote it, and thank you to you for bringing it up. And sorry, I've answered the question so horribly, Ivan.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
No, it was. And it actually, in my opinion, it's, I think it's the answer, the non-answer, the reflection, I think very much kind of encapsulates maybe the way that you kind of live those words kind of in your own way, and how you approach life, very openly, very transparently, very honestly, with a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-awareness, and I think all of those attributes are kind of encapsulated there.
And it's really kind of you, Michael. Actually, a point that is perhaps valuable, because So humility is something that is a powerful, perhaps life and business tool, in that a very American thing is to build yourself up and say, I'm the greatest, I'm Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest. And there are many different versions of that. We just had a president who was like that. But actually a better long-term goal is to underplay yourself. And if you underplay yourself, you have more freedom of action, and there's more opportunity to take risks, because there's maybe some false humility there. I actually think more of myself than I'm willing to let on, but it's just a safe place to be, actually. And I'm surprised more people don't use that strategy. Although something comes up for me this is a quote from Golda Meir to her ministers. Golda Meir was the first female prime minister of Israel. And she said, don't be so humble, you're not that great.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Back to you, Ivan. I'm sorry to.
Yeah. And so kind of building on that, kind of building on the self-awareness and kind of the honesty and the humility. I heard you mention one time, and it kind of struck me, that you have a bias towards inaction. You're a thinker, you're a philosopher, but I think those of us who have managed portfolios can kind of relate to it. And actually, the metaphor that I use is a baseball metaphor. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with baseball, but we might have some folks listening from the States. And I played outfield. And so when you play outfield, there's a lot of standing around. There's a lot of relaxed concentration. There's a lot of paying attention to the wind, paying attention to situations, paying attention to the count, the pitcher, the batter, the matchup, who's, the situation. But there's not necessarily movement. There's not necessarily anything to do, because you might just get the ball hit to you 2 or 3 times a game, and maybe only one of those is the really kind of clutch opportunity. And so that's kind of what I think investing is. There's a lot of you're an outfielder. You're standing around, always kind of in touch with the situation, never quite knowing when the opportunity is going to show up. But you have to do all those little things to be in position. You need to shade over 1 step, 2 steps. Because the odds, there's a slightly greater chance that the ball's going to go down the line as opposed to the gap. And so all of that comes together in what appears to be inaction. And so I know when you say that you have a bias towards inaction, it's a very active inaction, and so what for you, what is kind of that catalyst that says, okay, the ball's hit to me, now it's time to go. How do you make those, how do you go from inaction to action? How do you make your decisions, and kind of what is that trigger?
So I have to continue with the baseball analogy a little bit. And I've living in the Northeast of the United States, about once a year. When I lived in the Northeast, I'd go and either watch. I do enjoy watching the Boston Red Sox play the New York Yankees, and those are always fun games. And I think that I think I support the Yankees more than the Red Sox. A whole bunch of enemies there, I'm sure. And there's a special way in which, New Yorkers say that Boston Red Sox suck, but the way they say it is a special New York accent.
Yes.
I went to school in the UK, and I remember being put on a cricket field in the outfield, basically finding myself so bored that I started daydreaming until they were yelling and screaming at me because the ball had come in my direction and I didn't know what the hell to do with it. So I was pretty useless at cricket, at the outfield of cricket, which is kind of a British version of baseball. And I think that I want to give you I think that your insight that playing the outfield, it's a beautiful insight, I haven't heard it before, is a state of relaxed concentration, a state of paying attention while calming the mind, being ready for action while being distant from the action, is a really, really beautiful analogy. And I have to think about that some more. I think that's worthy of a short write-up in one way or another. But I want to give you a different sort of insight, which is that I think that when things happen, well, there's a model of the human brain, which is that we kind of evolved as a species from reptiles. And so we kind of we can talk about a reptilian brain and a mammalian brain and maybe the neocortex, which is kind of our modern brain. But when things get bad and when the proverbial hits the fan, a lot of our behavior is determined by the reptilian brain, which basically knows fight, flight, freeze. And so I think that a lot of my bias towards inaction, especially when markets go haywire, has got less to do with this kind of beautifully painted idea that you described of, calm attention and more a freeze mentality. And it's just this strange and unlucky coincidence that somebody who freezes in reaction to market insanity, provided they've selected the right investments, is going to do pretty well. And actually what a lot of other people do is they go into fight or flight. And fight or flight could be aggressively buying and trying to catch a falling knife, or it might be flight and selling under any circumstances, because the idea of this reptilian brain is that it completely dominates all rational thinking. And so I think that a huge part of my bias towards inaction is actually that when markets go haywire, my brain goes to a version of freeze, don't do anything, which actually is quite suitable. And then another aspect of it, which is, you can't really apply it in the baseball or cricket analogy, which is that I believe that I have ADHD. And so, there's a wonderful title of a book related to ADHD, which is It's Hard to Change the World If You Can't Find Your Keys. And I think that a significant part of my bias towards inaction, say, when the markets aren't going haywire, is I'm just not that good at getting things done. And so if you're not that good at getting things done, even the ability to take the decision to pick up the phone, to call the broker, to open up the browser for your brokerage account to buy or sell, that's something that is just hard work for me to do because maybe I don't have my computer. It was something is going on. So part of the bias towards inaction that I have is because of that. And I guess those two things are probably kind of innate things. But I think that what you describe is a fantastic analogy that, again, I'm really grateful for your excellent questions, because I think that to aim, first of all, before I went on the cricket pitch when I was a child, if somebody had explained to me that I was aiming for this calm state of attentiveness, I might have been a better outfielder. They kicked me out of that team pretty quick.
Yeah, the outfield gets a bad rap, because I think people, especially early on, they don't see the ball often, so that's where they kind of hide people, But eventually, it gets to the point where it's an essential part of the game.
And we've all seen these amazing games and these amazing moments in games where an outfielder catches the ball, the hitter hits the ball into the air, and there's this whole, either leap of joy or scariness when you think he's about to score a home run, and then the catcher goes, and that's like the catcher is the hero moment. But to say to oneself as an investor, what you're looking to do is to be an outfielder in the style that Michael has just suggested, I think is a wonderful idea. And I think that the problem with what I've described in my bias towards inaction is that they're innate and they happen to fit the situation often, but they're not well suited. And what you really want is intelligent calmness. And the fight-flight syndrome, or the I'm just too disorganized, is not intelligent calmness. And what you're describing is intelligent calmness. And I guess I just think, and this came up in a conversation recently, so what I'm describing is innate to me, but let's say you don't have ADHD, so that's not a problem for you. And let's say you don't have the fight-flight thing. I just think that an awareness of, and so what you've painted is to tell somebody who's says, yeah, but I actually go into fight when the markets go haywire, and then to say, yeah, but imagine you're an outfielder, so the guy may be bowling the ball at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and he may be really good, but you as an outfielder aren't going to run and attack the pitcher, and you're not going to run away from this ball that's being pitched very fast. You're going to be in calm awareness, I think, is a wonderful idea. So yet again, thank you for allowing me to give you a non-answer answer to your question.
No, it was again perfect. I mean, spot on. I mean, that's it's reflection. That's exactly it. And so I kind of want to build on that because you touched on kind of a related topic to something else I want to bring up, which is matching your investing style to your personality. I mean, I think a lot of people in this business find people who have been successful, who have done things a certain way, and say, oh well, that's the ticket, like that is the way to invest. But I think the longer that people go, they realize, they say, well, actually that worked in that for that person, for that personality, in that institutional context, in that whatever the setup was. And there are a lot of factors which are either innate to the individual or unique to the situation that are, or perhaps unique to a market cycle or a period in time, that stops working because, again, this, we're talking about a dynamic system here. And so, how do you think about kind of matching investment styles to your own, personality and just that dynamic? There are a lot of flavors of value. There are a lot of flavors of investors, very, broadly defined. And specifically, holding stocks for a very long time, because that is something that I personally am not as inclined to do. It's not to say I'm, turning the portfolio every day, but holding periods of 12 months, of 18 months, are kind of a target for me, but tend to be aspirational, and so how do you, Leo, let alone 5 years, 10 years, and so how do you, specifically, as it relates to kind of long-term investing, and kind of more generally, just kind of investment styles and personal predilection and kind of that dynamic.
So I'll tell you, there are so many places to go with that. So I just want to talk, first of all, this might be more of an answer as opposed to a non-answer answer. I
knew we'd get there.
How do you decide what is the appropriate level of concentration in your portfolio? And I think that I can, on paper, make a very strong case that when I finally find a good idea, I should really put 10% of my portfolio into it. But if I were to act on that and actually put 10% in, I don't think that the way I function would be able to handle the volatility that would result from that. And you can imagine that, you can't rule out that every now and then, or I can't rule out with the kinds of investments that I believe I'm making, that every now and then a 10% position might not be a complete loss, but might be 5 years later trading at below my purchase price and not a successful investment. And what I've found is that the upper limit to the size of position upon investing in it should be no more than 5%. And that has meant that there have been times when I have said, this idea A is an amazing idea, and I think it's likely to do extraordinarily for us, but I already have 5% in it. So I'm going to go and put extra dollars into this idea B, which I think is inferior to idea A, but I'm consciously going to do that because I know that I won't be able to handle or sleep well with the volatility of everything in the first idea. And so, and that's something that has served me really, really well over the last few years. It's a kind of a few years ago, I had an investment in a company that went bankrupt, which was an extremely unpleasant experience for me. And one of the mistakes that I'd made going in there was that I'd allocated too much to that idea. By contrast, over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been ideas that I've invested in that have gone down by 50% or more. And I haven't lost a moment's worry or sleep over it because I made them, I right-sized them. So this idea of investing for your personality is extraordinarily important. And all good investors, I think, ultimately are good explorers of their own interior space. The second place that I want to go to is an idea that was originally expressed to me by somebody called Milo Jones, who's a professor of security studies at a university in Poland. And he comes to my ValueX conference every year, a very, very smart guy who's also a value investor. And he's kind of like focused some of his talks on the idea that the specific philosophy of value investing that is so dominant in the world was developed effectively by a guy who was born just after the Depression and grew up in the Midwest and lived in the Midwest. And so there's a whole bunch of assumptions that are made around that idea about the political stability, for example, of the countries where you make your investments. And his point is that if you're now going to be a investor investing in China, Turkey, South Africa, Argentina, you can't make those same assumptions. And a lot of why the system that Warren Buffett developed for himself works is got to do with the fact that he was looking at the world from the Midwest. And it's not clear to me that even as Guy Spier sitting in Switzerland, which is not that dissimilar to the Midwest, but certainly if you're an investor sitting in Singapore or Istanbul or somewhere else in the world, and perhaps not investing just in the United States, it's not clear to me that you should apply exactly those same value investing principles. And it's this idea of slavishly following an idea, even though its usefulness has maybe not run out, but doesn't entirely and completely apply. And then I had a third response and I'd written it down, but now I can't read my own writing. What am I supposed to do with that? So I think it comes to me to this idea of how do I know that I'm in my circle of competence, and is my circle of competence his circle of competence, and how do I define the areas around my circle of competence? And I think here, having tried to give substantive answers, I will retreat now back, Michael, to non-answer answers or non-answer reflections, which is that it's clearly an important question, and it's very difficult to answer. Yeah,
and it's I would argue, in my experience, that it just takes time. It's just that reflection, the long feedback cycles, and just experience. And I think over time, you kind of adapt, you settle into what's right for you, or like you said, previously, or it's just not going to work, because I think eventually everybody has to kind of make their own mark, kind of leave their own stamp, have their own fingerprint on their own investment process.
And so I'll just give you a short story recently. So people have asked me about this investment checklist that Monish put together quite a while ago now, and I have my own version of it, and he has his own version where he's added a whole bunch of different things. And so when we make mistakes, or when we see others make mistakes, we should look down our checklist and see what are the things that they could have known at the time that they made the mistake, or that I could have known, and then figure out a checklist item, and then we can add another item to our checklist. And I want to give you, so I spoke to somebody recently who had invested in a national lottery company, a national monopoly, a very good monopoly. There are a number of these national lottery companies, and usually it's a state-run monopoly. And it's gambling. It's kind of selling lottery tickets, which is kind of a bit like cigarettes makes poor people poorer, because it's usually the less well-off who buy these lottery tickets. But it's a phenomenal business, especially because it's a monopoly. And shortly after this person bought these shares, the company got investigated for being a monopoly. And this person is feeling peeved because they felt like they were buying into this excellent business. But now there's obviously the shares have traded down a lot. I have no idea where the shares will go. They may go back up again. They're quite likely to go back up again. But I think that this person discovered that they might be somebody who doesn't want to invest in sin industries, because sin industries tend to get investigated and tend to be looked at with a leery eye. And so, and that kind of my point to this person was that they should be forgiving of themselves. So we learn through these mistakes. We have to make sure that the amount we invest into the idea, because it will be a mistake, it may be a mistake. We have to invest enough enough that it's meaningful, but not so much that we lose sleep over it. Learn the lessons, forgive oneself. Don't double down on the mistake, because in his case, I don't think that it would have been right to sell them after they got investigated, because the market will have overreacted to the investigation. So that's just a kind of a little bit of a vignette of a real life example of how it's a dynamic process by which we figure out what our own personal investing style is and what works for us and what doesn't. And so somebody who's listening to this who says, oh my God, but I don't have my personal investing style. Well, that's okay, because you haven't probably spent enough time with it. But I think, again, and forgive me for going back to this theme, is that merely to have that awareness in your mind as you do it is going to enable us to learn what is our investing style. So why, if this turns out to be a mistake, what will I've learned from the mistake is another good question to ask. So
actually, it's interesting, your answer. Actually, I would like to keep going down this rabbit hole, because a couple of years ago, I heard an interview in which you said that we should not follow the advice that you gave in your book. Okay. So as for not to talk to company managers, that is a thing that very often a lot of people is like talking around that, So that you were wrong about that advice. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'd be so happy to. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to do a number of things. First of all, by turning around on the advice that I gave in the book and saying that was completely wrong, what an idiot I was, hopefully that increases my flexibility of mind, hopefully commits myself in a public way to being flexible about positions that I've taken in the past in public. We're all learning, we're all growing, and the way we learn and we grow is that we change our minds on things. That is a sign that we're learning and growing, actually, if we keep the same opinions on everything. So, that my analogy as to why that seemed like a good idea at the time that I wrote it, obviously is not a good idea, can best be explained for me by the analogy to a chainsaw. So if we're lumberjacks and we need to cut down trees in the forest, big, fat redwood trees and the like, we're not going to use a penknife. We're not going to use a manual saw. We're going to have two guys sawing at that thing. We probably will have to change the saw blade a few times, and it's going to be hard work for a few days cutting away at that tree before we can fell that tree. By contrast, if we have a powerful chainsaw, we're going to be able to make light work of it. And probably within an hour or two, we can cut the tree down. Only thing is if we don't handle the chainsaw correctly, we could also cut off one of our co-workers' legs. We could cut somebody's heads off. I mean, these are very dangerous tools if they're not used properly. And so the analogy is that talking to the management is a dangerous tool, because you can fall into so many different traps. You can fall into their sales speak. You can be convinced about all sorts of things about the world that may or may not be true, because you're talking to the management who may be overly promotional, or they may themselves very genuinely and seriously not understand certain aspects of their business, because to understand that aspect of the business would be to want to leave it. The guy who's working at the casino doesn't want to believe that his business is exploiting something terrible in humans. He wants to believe, he also wants to go home and look good in front of his family. So you go and ask a manager of a casino, do you think that you're running an immoral business that is legal but immoral? He's going to find 1,000. So they really are convinced. In any case, the fact that you can be so seriously misled by management doesn't mean that there's no information and there's no insight to be gained from the management. And so I treat it like a chainsaw. It's a very useful tool. Absolutely, it ought to be a source of information. It needs to be handled with very, very great care and discipline and knowledge and insight as to how to use it. And so, and to say don't speak to management is a very black and white thing. And I don't think the world is black and white. So yeah, that's an update. And I would like hereby in this moment to apologize to those readers who think that is still my view. And I would tell you, Ivan and Michael, if at some point, if and when you guys decide to write a book, there's many wonderful things that come from writing a book, but one of the things that can get, in German, you'd say mühsam, is kind of annoying, but it's kind of like not annoying, but just something that something you have to deal with, is that many people will have read my book and they want to meet the guy who wrote the book. And the guy who wrote the book existed in 2014, but he's moved on and the book hasn't. And if, just for your interest there, I've been asked by my agent, and I've thought about writing another book. And I'm pretty sure that I'm coming to the conclusion that I'm the type of person who has only one good book in him. And I'm not a natural author. I'm not Michael Lewis. I'm not William Green. I'm not. But what I might do is write an update to that book where we can correct some of these gross errors.
It's interesting because, the interview, it's finishing, and I just wanted to close saying one thing that back in the day, I had a teacher, a Kenjutsu teacher, and he told me that if you take a picture, if you took a picture, I don't know, a few years ago, months ago, even though, and then you see it today, and you were practicing, okay? So it's a picture of you practicing. So if you like what you see, is that you has not evolved. You have not learned anything. So you gotta not like what you see in that picture back in the day. So it's kind of an analogy in this case, and it's I like the answer. This one I like it a lot. The other ones also, but the other ones were, as you said, answering with no answers, that were awesome, by the way. And this one was pretty straight to the point. So I loved it.
I just want to pause on that because you just expressed another really, really beautiful and poetic idea. So, and it kind of goes so well with the idea that I expressed of if you're not changing your mind, you're not growing. So we always need to leave space for ourselves and others to change their minds. But if you see a picture of yourself practicing some kind of activity where you can judge the quality and you don't like what you see, you have not evolved. Roger Federer, seeing himself play tennis at age 14, should say, "Oh my God, I was so bad." You don't say, "Oh, I was so excellent." It was just a beautiful, beautiful idea. Just staying with this idea of allowing for growth and creating an environment in which we can grow. This is a very simple idea, but I've learned it at least a decade ago, and I try and use it as much as I can. So we're all egotistical beings. And so if I stand up in front of an audience and I say, "I think ... whatever it is, my opinion is ... the more I do that, the more difficult it is for me to change my position, even if I've genuinely changed it because I've taken the position publicly. So one way to help ourselves with that is to really try not to say, "I think, I believe," and rather we can say, "This person thinks, this person believes." So when we're asked our opinion, rather than give our own opinion, which could harden our position, we can say what we see other people's positions to be. And, we could say, well, the person on the left of the political spectrum thinks this, the person on the right of the political spectrum thinks that. I think I tend to agree with the person on the left, or I think I tend to agree. But that leaves us in our reasoning plenty of room to move around. I think that's really important. It's kind of a little habit. But the idea of, thank you, because you make me feel better about the fact that I took this ridiculous position in the book and now I don't agree with it. That's me looking back and saying, "Oh my God, I was so useless."
No way, man. So thanks a lot, Guy. It's been a pleasure to interview you. Actually, that was a thing that I wanted to do from a long time ago. And now, I'm super glad. So thanks a lot. No. I think your audience is going to enjoy a lot also. And I don't know, Michael, you want to say something to close the episode?
No, yeah, just very, very much appreciated, and appreciate the insights, and I think we probably all have portfolios from points in time that we also might reflect back on and say, wow, hey, I think we've grown a little bit, and so I think that's another application of that idea. But no, I appreciate it. A lot of wisdom, a lot of humility, but also strong as a tree. So I appreciate it, Guy. And with that, we'll go on to the masterclass. So So I very much appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me, both of you, and thank you for thinking up some great questions.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you liked this episode. For me, it's been an authentic pleasure, indeed a great pleasure listening to Guy. So if you like this kind of content we create, if you want to share it over social networks, you know how to do it. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you very much, everyone.